Yeah, hey Andy, thanks very much, and welcome along everybody. So the topic of the debate today is really when it comes to marketing and needing some resource, then whether to insource or outsource, and that's the question I'm going to be addressing over the next 15 minutes or so. Before I jump into the detail of it, then to give you a bit of background on me and kind of why I'm talking around this. As Andy mentioned, my business, a co-founder of, is ISl Talent. So we're a recruiter for startups and scale-ups. We do cover marketing, but that's not the focus of what we do. The focus of what we do is working with businesses that are growing across technology, predominantly also across sales, marketing, commercial and operations. So I've learned a lot from working with different startups and scale-ups of all shapes and sizes, from fintech to femtech. Also learned a fair bit about hiring, sometimes successfully, sometimes not so successfully, for my business, where there's 18 of us. We've been going 15 years. I've definitely had to hire more than 18 people to get those 18 that we've got today. So there's some clear lessons learned from that, as well as the businesses we work with. We worked with 88 startups and scale-ups predominantly last year, businesses between 10 and 100 employees. A few examples of those: so Rollmapper, a business that's building inclusive job descriptions, placed some, I think 3 marketing roles with them, everything through from their chief technology officer through to some developers. Clue Computing, we've hired maybe 20 roles for in the last 9 months or so, and we'll continue to do so, and that's covered marketing, technology, sales and some management. And then a few other businesses, one much earlier stage, but although we don't focus on a sector, we're clearly seeing a lot within clean tech and climate change at the moment, like Connect Earth. And then Yapily, a much bigger business, over 100 employees. I think we placed their first technical person and done a bit more since, but not quite so much now. They're a certain size and scale. And then my particular focus is doing whatever I need to do running the business, but also helping with early stage programs, accelerators, growth programs, people like the Accelerator Network, Digital Catapult, and then also doing some stuff around inclusion and diversity in technology-driven businesses and founders for schools, connecting sort of education and employment. So a bit of background on me, but obviously not the focus is very much on those of you that are listening live and maybe tapping into this afterwards. So the key question is, what's the best way to resource your marketing? So you've got a challenge, a problem, an opportunity, however you would frame it, and you need some resource. And there definitely are, a consideration there between whether you should be looking at insourcing or outsourcing. The first thing I would do before you get too excited about a particular CV, or before you look at the website or the credentials for an agency and see some brilliant sort of logos and credibility there, is really start with you. So this quote here about the first principle of success is desire, really working out what you want and then using that to start off with is where I would often frame conversations with founders who ask me about how they resource for something. And a lot of what I'll talk about today will be focused on the marketing side, but I think you could apply it equally, whether it's looking at your software development or your marketing or your sales. The first place to really think about is, what is it you want to achieve? What are your objectives? What are the strategies that you might want to follow? What are the tactics? Now, as you start to flow down that chain, something like the tactics, you might not really know, which is fine. You should be okay with that. But you should definitely know from an objectives point of view what it is you want to achieve. And if we put a marketing before that objectives, you may be a little bit uncertain. I would be starting with the business objectives, because of course, if your marketing objectives don't tie in with that, then you're really going to struggle to see the value in it, whether it's through an agency or through a hire or something in between. And you need to think about what's important to you, to your business, what you have at the moment. One of the ways to think about this is, you often see this when you're talking to service providers. They can say that you can either focus on something that is quick, i.e. the speed, focus on the price, the cost, or focus on the equality. And the impossible bit in the middle there is to achieve all three. I think when it comes to looking at agency support, outsourcing, whether it looks at hires, you can make an argument that if you just looked at the simple monthly cost, an agency might seem expensive, but maybe should be able to work more quickly because they can probably pour more than one resource into what you need straight off. If you looked at the staff side of things, that may seem cheaper each month, Probably takes longer when you look at the time to hire, the cost of, or the time of onboarding and getting someone up to speed. And particularly if you're looking for a number of people, that will take you longer. But I think that you'll find, somebody who comes on board could actually achieve something very quickly. An agency may not be as costly as you might think. The quality is probably where most people would gravitate. So you may have limited resources and you may have certain timescales, but the quality, no matter which route you look at, is probably what you want to be focusing on. I think that although we're talking about a title of should I insource or outsource, so should I look at agency or should I look at the in-house hires, I think the reality is that perhaps similar to how we may be all working now, we maybe largely talk about hybrid working, but I'm in my business 3 days a week in the office, at home 2 days a week. Someone else may come into an office once a month or maybe once a quarter, or get the team together. And so I think it's a spectrum where a lot of us are probably in the middle. And when it comes to the marketing side of things, I rarely speak to people that are 100% agency or 100% in-house. If you look at everything that is encompassed within marketing, I'm sure there's more than the 9 examples I've put here, but the content writing through to the analytics, the strategy piece through to executing on some of the SEO stuff and giving you an email marketing system, there is a hell of a lot to marketing. And so within my business, there is some that we have in-house, there is some that we outsource. Within a lot of the startups and the scale-ups we work with, then they do have a spectrum and they do sort of sit somewhere in the middle, even if it's leaning more towards the left or more towards the right. And of course, your people, if you hire them, may start off doing more strategic work and going into more tactical. It may be the same with the agency side of things. So I think I don't see this necessarily as a black or white. I either need to be at the left or the right of the spectrum. I'll go into a little bit more detail later as to how you might choose which bits you outsource and which bits you bring in-house. But one of the things that's probably useful to show you is what are the reasons that some people may choose different routes. So there's an organization called SEMrush, who are in the SEO world, and they published this chart here, which across a large amount of data, they ask people, why do you outsource marketing activities? And you can see here the different reasons that people said. So the number 2 reasons are both around in-house. So not enough in-house expertise, not enough in-house resources. They may seem the same. I guess the first one is about the skills, the capabilities, and the second is probably more about the manpower. So those 2 may overlap, but they are different. The third one there, I think, is an important one to flag. The need to scale up marketing activities. If you're looking to raise funding, or if you've got a particular milestone or a window of opportunity, definitely one of the reasons that you'll see in the data here and that I've seen in my experience is that you need to move quickly. And actually having an agency with a proven track record, with a model they know will need to be adapted for you, but actually they've rolled out across other businesses going through similar journeys, is perhaps a playbook that would give you more confidence than a person coming in who's forming their own plan. And that fourth point there, I think, is useful, just an outside perspective. So you can get that in other ways than working with an agency, but clearly they're working with businesses of all shapes and sizes, so can bring that expertise in. So if you're considering what to do, then have a look at these reasons here, and your reasons should be your reasons, going back to sort of starting with you, but actually make sure that you've thought through what are the reasons that other people may do it to kind of adapt to your own decision. The cost is a big factor, of course. So just some data that might help you with that when it comes to the hiring side of things. So here's some data from Adzuna across the last 12 months or so, looking at the average salaries of everybody from a head of marketing through to a marketing executive. I think the data is credible, but it looks like in June 2021, you should have gone and hired lots of head of marketing because they, for some reason, became even cheaper than a marketing manager. So perhaps take June 2021 out of the equation for whatever reasons. That was a strange month in the world of marketing hiring. But this is hopefully useful as a sense check as to the sort of money you might be investing if you're going to bringing on full-time people. I would say that within the technology world that we work, you'll often find a premium on these skills. So we've placed 3 digital marketing managers for SaaS companies in the last 3 months, and they've probably been at an average around about 55 or 65,000 compared to the sort of 40 to 45 you see here. Of course, if you're perhaps less so than 3 years ago, but if you're in Leeds versus London, you know, Bristol versus Cornwall, you may see some regional differences. But of course, at the moment, a lot of people will be able to seek and obtain opportunities across the country. And that doesn't mean that everybody's getting London wages, but definitely means that good people are in demand across the board, not just from people within their postcode. But some data that hopefully helps you there in terms of the money part of which way should you go. So moving on to the second part. So we've talked about, well, actually you need to start with yourself, but you also need to understand the lay of the land, the money involved, the reasons people may outsource. You also need to understand that as time goes by, and particularly as you go from startup to scale up, you get some initial traction and you start to go into growth mode, that your model will change, and it has to really, if you're going to evolve as a business. So this quote here, if you always do what you always did, you'd always get what you always got, then of course you want to hold on to the things that are working well, but you're going to need to change as you go through the different stages of business. And within the marketing side of things, that definitely means that you may well switch from one model to another. I think on the second roundtable, Ed, you put up this slide, which I've stolen here, and talk about that change from startup through to scale up. And that sort of generalization to specialization is definitely one that I see when it comes to the skill side of things. So often the need within a startup when it comes to marketing is quite broad, and then you start to specialize as you go on. And there's definitely an argument to say that lends itself to working with an agency to begin with, who can give you that broader skill set, and then perhaps hiring your people as you scale, but that's definitely not the only route that you would see. But you definitely need to make sure you've thought about going from that generalist marketing skill set to specialist, whether it's through an agency or through a hiring a team or somewhere in the middle. So recognize that there is going to be a shift, and it may not be that it's on the first of the month where suddenly everything changes. It may be more gradual than I'm making out here, but there should definitely be a change in the model, and potentially at least a review, if not a change in the resources that you're using. One of the things you will see if you're going down the hiring route is you may be starting to think about what's called T-shaped marketeers. So I can't remember, I think maybe it's someone from HubSpot that coined the phrase, but going from someone who across the top here has that broad skill set, so understands, if not all, then definitely many of the different parts of marketing, but really has that detailed knowledge on a particular area. So in the image here, paid media is where that person would have their stem of the T. But actually it could be in any one of these areas. So it could be that one of you listening now, your STEM, if you like, is within email marketing, but actually the person sat next to you on the session is within social media, and someone else within search marketing. So don't think your T-shaped marketer has to be a paid media. The principle here is that there may well be a benefit in hiring someone who understands enough of the broader spectrum, but is very focused on the channel that you need a specific skill set in. And hopefully, going back to Ed's slides, as you learn more about the channels that are working for you, you're now wiser at that scale up stage around what the specific STEM should be in. Whereas if you tried to hire a T-shaped marketer on day one or very early days, it may be you hire someone in paid media when actually your need is very much in content marketing. So because you're wiser, you've got more data, you've got more understanding as to what works, it means you're better equipped to know what to hire. Earlier on, we talked about the benefits of kind of outsourcing. So to complete the picture there, this was from the Data and Marketing Association, data in the last couple of years as to what people expected and what people achieved from in-housing, i.e. hiring a team. So some of the people that contributed data here would have built a team from day one, and some of them will have worked with an agency and then decided to bring a team on board. So there's a lot of data here which you can review afterwards, but you can see that things like increased productivity, better brand consistency, and cost saving were some of the expected and also achieved benefits. But there's obviously a lot of different reasons that people would have gone down the in-housing route. There's no one factor that would lead you to do it. And coming back to the first point there in terms of starting with what you're looking for should hopefully influence which one of these factors you value most, and looking at the data, which one is perhaps most likely to be achieved. And then the final part is that no matter which route you choose, what I want to emphasize is that you need to be involved. So accountability is definitely, whether it comes to working with an agency or working with an individual or a team that are employed by you, it's not something you're simply going to be able to say marketing's fixed, and as an owner of a business, I'm going to leave that and see success in 12 months' time. You need to be involved along the way. A big part of that, in my experience, is around the alignment. So if I think about people I've worked with, marketing service providers, but also everybody from my accountants through to people that we've used to hire for my business, then three things come to mind. One is that you need to get to know them to make sure you're aligned. Sometimes that can be quite a painful initial process, but it's necessary to avoid issues further on down the line. Whether it's from day one or on day 100, then the communication is key, with regular data from the service provider, the agency in this case, regular updates, and you need to have some sort of review process what's booked in to make sure you stay aligned. So what's been going well, what's not been going so well, what can we do differently in the future? That's essentially, in my mind, if I think about our best service providers, they build that into the process from day one. But if not, it's something I will ask them to make sure we cover those three things. And as a manager, my experience managing people, sometimes well, sometimes not so well, and what I've seen others do, then they're very similar. First is good onboarding and making sure you set people up for success to begin with. You give them clarity, or they're aligned on the goals of the business from both a business and a marketing perspective. And then I talked about reviews with service providers. You make sure you have regular one-to-ones with your team. I was very guilty to begin with of saying, I do one-to-ones all the time with my team, but it was their first 3 months and probably their last 3 months and not the 2 years in between. So making sure you'll have regular reviews with your team. So those sort of principles there apply across either option, but really need to make sure you're enhancing the accountability to get the result you're looking for. And then the final point here is, if you are thinking about a team, and I guess to a certain extent you will be thinking about that at some point, then we did a retention report a couple of years ago, which looked at why people left the job. And perhaps if I'd asked you the number one reason, you might have suggested culture. That would definitely be backed up by the data. And within that, the number one factor that people attributed to poor culture that caused them to leave a job was lack of career development and progression. And I think that's an important point to draw out here, that if you're going to hire a marketeer, then you need to make sure you've got a job for them today. But also, if you want to keep a marketeer, you need to make sure you've got an idea of progression. That doesn't need to be an org chart that maps out the next 5 years, but it needs to be regular conversations about how to actually progress them. So that is plenty of talking from me, and I'm now hopeful that we'll get contribution from others via a roundtable discussion. So a couple of potential things we might want to talk about, but we're definitely not limited to here. If you're sitting there thinking, well, this is great, but actually how on earth do I assess marketing skills, whether it's for an agency or whether it's for a hire? Maybe there's stuff we can talk about. And also, I know from my point of view, I do like, but also don't like the quote around, half the money I spend on marketing is wasted. I'm just not sure which half. And I've become a bit wiser over the years. I'm no expert, but clearly you want to be able to measure the success. So I shall stop sharing now and grab a drink, but also then see if there's any particular questions on what we've covered so far, but also see if those points of discussion are worth going into in a bit more detail.
Alan, thank you very much. Lots of really interesting talking points that you've introduced there. I wonder, are there any questions from around the table? If not, I'll kick Alan off with a question I've got, but I'll offer it out to the room first.
I mean, I had one around measuring success, because the thing with marketing and any sort of growth related role is it's got a very tangible return on investment, because you're kind of measuring, everything's quite measurable. And especially, I guess, when you're bringing on an agency, you can see how much you're spending on the agency, how much you're spending on ads, and therefore it's very easy to work out your return on investment. But how do you think what do you do differently when you're hiring someone? I feel like actually a lot of the time founders don't necessarily see hires as like a return on investment, because it's kind of bringing a person into their team. So they actually weigh that quite a lot into the success of that person ultimately. But how do you see it different, I suppose, in terms of measuring success of a hire versus measuring success, which is relatively simple, I think, of an agent bringing on an agency?
Yeah, I think I'd probably expect an agency to come with a playbook or a scorecard or something that is, I may put my own numbers in there, but allows me to measure success without having to think through it too much from my point of view. I've definitely seen, I think the way to measure the success is to start off with that blank sheet of paper and think about what you want that person to achieve. So if I was talking to a founder a few months ago, and he said, right, Alan, I need some help with my marketing. I need a marketing manager. And actually, one option would have been to take his job spec, go and hire him somebody, and in 6 months' time say, how has he or she got on? I think a better way to play things is to not quite rip out the spec, but say, okay, Tristan, so tell me, when you talk about needing a marketing manager, whatever that person is called, in 18 months' time, if we're sitting there with that hire and praising them because they've done an amazing job, what is it you're going to be looking at from a data point of view or from an anecdotal point of view that would indicate they've been successful? And it might be they've taken us from 0% of our sales as inbound leads through to 25%. Or it may be they've now actually taken us from a paid media success, channel through to an organic one. So there should be something there that indicates why you're hiring. And I think then the performance measures, the capabilities will start to flow from there. But often where I see people do it badly is just jumping into, I've got a marketing need, I need to hire a marketing person, getting overawed by a CV and logos and education, and then realizing 6 months in, they haven't thought about how they're going to measure that success. So I think it's a really good question, but often it comes from that initial definition of the role, I'd suggest.
Yeah, great. Makes sense. Thanks, Aaron.
I got I suppose a question around kind of senior hires being brought in. From your perspective, kind of when you're talking to founders and when there's been, I suppose, a reasonable raise of money, is it a case that they're, bring in a head of or a senior marketer, and then that marketer then builds their team? Or is it a case of, bringing in some more junior marketing expertise that work under the founder or kind of up within the structure at that point, and then bring in a head of that has experience in those areas? Interesting to understand what you think about that.
Yeah, I think the answer, as often is to many of these questions, is it depends, and so much on the context. So partly from my point of view, I know nothing about marketing. So if I was going through that, I'd probably gravitate towards a senior person. Maybe Ed, with your background, you'd probably look for more of a pair of hands. So I think it depends on whether your need is strategic or operational. I think it also, how wise are you on, from a marketing point of view, what's worked well so far? So if I know that content marketing has worked really well for us as a channel, then I'm probably going to gravitate towards hiring a content writer to execute on plans we've already made and bring their own skills and expertise. Whereas if I'm moving into a new territory or new market where I don't know what good looks like, I probably want that broader skill set and maybe need to invest slightly more in a senior or strategic person who can look at the lay of the land and then maybe hires. Of course, most senior people would like the opportunity to build their own team. And that has to be part of the conversation. I've definitely seen mistakes made where someone's been brought in and thought their remit was to build the team and then left frustrated 3 months later because they were, in their words, stuck with the existing team, which they didn't really rate. So I think there's no right or wrong answer, but whichever you're doing, you need to make sure you're transparent around the rules of the game, and those may change, but at least from the outset, talk about it. And I think it also depends on those external pressures. We've worked with businesses that have got venture funding and the VC has told them to make 3 C-level hires straight away. And maybe that's right, maybe that's not, but I think there needs to be a rationale behind it. And often probably the route that most choose is, well, we'll make a C-level hire in this area because we don't have the existing capabilities. In this area, we'll make a head of hire. And in this area, we'll grow our own because we're a bit more patient. So I think that's where it's kind of very much dependent on the context and the existing skill set within the business.
Yeah, I think to add on a perspective to that as well is there's no point hiring a tactician, a content marketer or a social media marketer or whatever if you're not confident in the strategy that you've got. So if you haven't got a strong set of business objectives and then you've got some marketing objectives and a strategy aligned to that, then you have to start with that senior hire. And that senior hire could be a marketing director, CMO, or it could be a non-exec, or it could be a strategic consultant, someone to set you on the right path before you hire the content marketer or the social media, the tactician. Otherwise, you might find yourself doing a lot of really interesting, good content marketing, or whatever that tactic is, without it really aligning to your strategy. So I think it's where you are in your journey. Have you got a marketing strategy? Yes, no, or the starting place is a more senior hire rather than someone just to kind of hit the ground and start churning out stuff. That'll be my perspective on that. And I wanted to ask you as well, when you're looking for marketing candidates, how do you weight it in terms of experience versus education? Because marketing is one of those industries where anybody can get into it without having done any formal qualifications or training. Do you think there is value in having experience over education, or education over experience, or a bit of both?
Yeah, I think it's always going to be a certain blend. I think actually to answer a slightly different question, I would probably, if you can, I would rip out the CVs and not worry about experience or education, but actually focus on much more practical ways of assessing someone's capability. So because someone did a marketing degree at a good university, or because someone worked for 5 years for Google, there's a risk that, lots of biases come in and you assume that person is going to be right for you versus actually assessing what is necessary within your business. So actually, if I looked at the CVs and backgrounds of everybody on here, some may have some marketing experience, some education, and some not at all. But actually, if my job is to write copy for social media, I'm much better to ask you in a way that doesn't create too much friction. It's not going to take you hours, but to write 150 words of copy for my Facebook landing page, and then get that copy in from everybody on this roundtable and assess that, because I'm measuring what matters rather than making judgments based on where someone went to university or the logo they last worked at before. So I'm dodging the question slightly, but also saying I think there's a better way, which is probably not relying on 2 pages of A4 to indicate whether someone's going to do a good job, but actually getting a more practical assessment of them.
Yeah, so assessing competencies is part of your overall recruitment process. So that sort of leads me on to the next question: is where should we be looking to find good candidates? Is it working through a recruiter? Is it online advertising? Is it networking? Where would you source good candidates for a startup?
Yeah, I think I'm always going to sing the praises, of course, of the value of a good recruiter, because I'd like to think I am one, but that's clearly not the only route you would want to take. I think that whatever route you take, you need to make sure that you are reaching the best people on the market rather than simply the best people, the best people in the market rather than simply the best people on the market. So whether it's a recruiter or you yourself, or you're outsourcing it to a third party or someone in your team, if you're simply posting an advert on LinkedIn or on Indeed and expecting that to get you great results, the chances are you'll have to get very lucky to achieve that. So that might reach the 10 or 15% of candidates that are out there actively looking, but clearly that doesn't represent the breadth of the talent pool. So first of all, is think about how you're going to reach that talent pool. Now, for some people, that might be going to local meetups. It might be engaging with people on Twitter, jumping into a room on Clubhouse, or connecting with people on LinkedIn. For others, it might be reaching into their network and talking to people they know. And for some, it might be working with a recruiter who has a track record in that area. But the starting point has to be, how can I reach never 100% of the market, but at least a bigger proportion than the ones that happen to be looking for a job that day. And although there's only always an urgency around the need that has to be this hire needed yesterday, it's then thinking about, well, if I default too much to established norms, I need someone with this amount of experience, this amount of education, how much do I limit the talent pool I'm getting? So what I've seen work really well is people sitting down with their team and saying, we need someone to help us on marketing. What type of person could this be? And I might have my own views on the background they come from, but actually my team probably say, well, it could be someone who did this or did that. And using that to have a much more inclusive job description, and then broadening out the talent pool. At the moment, there's clearly a significant skill shortage, whether it's in marketing, technology, or across many different areas. So I think the more that you can reduce those essential requirements down to the really essential ones, rather than the 10 that you claim to be essential, the more you can think about, rather than saying degree, say independent and thinker and problem solver, because someone with a degree may have that, but also someone who works in a coffee shop may have that. And you broaden that talent range. I think that means that you can often then fish in the pools that other people aren't looking, because they're being a little bit simplistic around the background someone may have.
Thanks, Alan. Any other questions from around the table?
Alan, I'd love to have your candid view of, I suppose, remote working versus in-office working, right? So I suppose there's a big swing, especially in kind of tech companies, for remote first. But there's also, positions, especially when, teams are growing and there's junior members of the team that need support, that there is benefits of being in an office to be able to help that and actually get more for them and more for the business out of being in an office.
Yeah.
I suppose it'd be interesting to know what you're seeing through that. And are candidates expecting to be remote the majority of the time still kind of going forward? And then maybe there's a bit of a switch and a change from a company perspective of having slightly more time being in an office.
Yeah, I think it's still kind of evolving, and I don't think we'll see it play out properly to sort of some sort of established norm, even if a trend goes for the next 2 or 3 years. 6 months ago, I would have said that almost every business we're working with is almost fully remote because of restrictions put on them. But now, even the ones that are describing themselves as remote first are still getting their teams together physically in some way. That may only be once a quarter, maybe it's once a week or so, but I think everybody is sort of in that murky middle, which looks differently for different people. There's a danger that ends up being the worst of both worlds rather than the best. But my hope is that, as a community, we'll learn about what works well to make that hybrid work and to give people the balance of flexibility and enjoy taking their son to school or being able to work at hours that suit them rather than clocking in and clocking out, but also not lose the impact of being together to problem solve or innovate and be creative. And I know you can do those, online, but from a personal point of view, I really struggle to see how you do those as well if you're not having that physical connection. I think it also depends on, in my business, we've all worked together for years and years now, and part of what is the culture within our business, what makes us work well is coming together. But if I was starting a business today, maybe I'd be more inclined to make remote first work and build our processes from day one to make that happen, rather than having to take too much history and change what people are comfortable with. So yeah, I think it depends on the context, but I think that it's probably as a starting point being in the middle and seeing how that works for your business. From a candidate perspective, at the moment, for the majority of roles, candidates can pick and choose. So if a candidate wants to work fully remotely, they'll find companies out there that will offer that. If a client came to us and said, we want someone in the office 5 days a week, we'd say no. We'd say, great, good luck, but we can't adequately find people when that's maybe only 5% of the talent pool that would accept that. So I think that's where everybody almost has to be in the middle, and maybe the balance of power shifts, but at the moment it's still in most functions and businesses that candidates can be choosy if they so want to.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I guess one last thing from me, less of a question actually, and more of an observation, going back to the survey results from Adzuna showing the average salary. Is a very interesting dip in June 21, wasn't it? I don't know what caused that, but I guess it just felt as though they felt a little bit low. I think we're seeing wages probably rising quite a lot right now, particularly within the marketing world, and certainly that senior end of the market as well. The head of marketing, I would expect to be earning quite a bit more than that. I think it was in the sort of 50-55K mark, wasn't it? So I feel like with a bit of an update, those numbers might be quite a bit higher.
Yeah, I think we're all facing kind of rising costs, aren't we? No matter what role you do, and so there's no doubt that that's on the minds of a lot of candidates. I think that candidates don't move for money, or at least very few of them do. But there's no doubt when people move, they almost have an expectation of seeing an increase in wages, and even more so now, where maybe their wages haven't changed, maybe they have changed, but their costs have changed as well. So I think the reality is that it definitely, people need to think more about investing in their team, so they don't probably have to hire in new people, so they can develop them. If you are hiring, you'll need to work out what the market is for your particular role, but you might well find that those figures are increasingly out of date with inflation where it is, and and the costs we're all facing for sure.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Alan. Are there any more questions from around the table? If not, we'll bring this round table to a close. Looks like we might have reached the end of the road for today, Alan. Thank you so much for your presentation. I thought that was really interesting. And thanks everyone for joining us for this fourth in a series of 5 Scale-up Marketing Roundtables. We will be back next Friday on the 27th of May at 12 o'clock looking at agencies. So building on some of the topics that Alan's introduced today around how to find an agency, how to recruit them, what the right agency looks like for your startup or scale-up organization. Thanks very much, and see you all soon.